The midst of this urban chaos, one woman stood still, as though she had been placed there by fate itself. Her name was Evelyn Blake, a 58-year-old mother, tall and dignified, though a weight seemed to bear down on her shoulders. She wore an old, tattered sack in her hand, an odd sight for someone so poised. Stay with us to see what unfolds next. Her daughter, Annie Blake, was 32 years old. Married to a prominent man, Jasper Blake, the state minister for economy, Annie was an epitome of success. A wife, a mother of 2 beautiful children, and the heir to a future that was as bright as the morning sun. But unlike her mother, Evelyn, was a woman of humble beginnings. She had been a school teacher all her life, content with teaching the next generation, but always feeling as though the world never quite saw her worth. Evelyn loved her daughter deeply, but in the shadows of her pride for Annie, there was something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. But it was always there, gnawing at her. It wasn't jealousy, but a deep-seated belief that Annie's success wasn't just a product of hard work. No, there was something else, something that had been kept hidden from the public eye. And now it was time for the world to know. Evelyn had come to this city to make a claim so wild, so impossible, that no one would have believed it unless they saw it with their own eyes. She wasn't here just for herself. She was here for her daughter, Annie. And for the first time in years, Evelyn was about to step into a world where her voice, her very presence, would make an indelible mark. The bank, America's Trust Bank, was one of the largest financial institutions in the state, owned by a conglomerate of powerful individuals. The bank had been the center of all things financial, holding the lives of thousands in its vaults. But Evelyn Blake had something no one could predict, a secret, and today she was going to reveal it. She stood at the entrance of America's Trust Bank, holding her sack in one hand. Her heart raced. The security guard eyed her suspiciously but said nothing. She moved past him without a word, walking with the purpose of someone who had nothing to lose. Inside the marble-floored lobby, polished and pristine, Evelyn's entrance was met with dismissive stares. To the employees in their sharp suits, she was just another black woman, an older one at that, carrying an old sack as if it were a statement of some kind. They all chuckled softly to themselves, some of them even exchanging looks of disbelief. What was this woman doing here? Was she lost? Was she begging for something? At the front desk, a young receptionist looked up at her and smiled sweetly, as though expecting her to ask for directions or some sort of charity. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of politeness that only came from years of practicing superiority. Evelyn ignored her smile, her eyes fixed on the young woman, who had no idea what was about to unfold. "I need to speak to the bank manager," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, then looked around the room. "You do realize this is America's Trust Bank, right? We don't just call your manager," Evelyn cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument. The receptionist hesitated, but, seeing the look in Evelyn's eyes, she relented. With a reluctant nod, she picked up the phone and dialed the manager's office. Within moments, Carter Spencer, the bank's manager, appeared. He was a well-dressed man in his mid-40s, a no-nonsense sort who had seen his fair share of desperate visitors. He walked briskly toward Evelyn, giving her the same once-over the rest of the employees had. "Can I help you?" Carter asked, but it wasn't a welcoming question. His eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Evelyn didn't waste any time. "I need to claim ownership of this bank," she said, her voice steady, though the words seemed to shock even her. The silence that followed was palpable. Carter blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'm Evelyn Blake. I'm the rightful owner of America's Trust Bank." For a moment, the manager just stared at her as if waiting for the punchline. Then he laughed, not a kind laugh, but one laced with mockery. "Lady, you've got the wrong place. I don't know who you are, but I suggest you leave before I have security escort you out." Evelyn stood her ground. The sack in her hand seemed to feel heavier now, like a burden she had carried for far too long. "Do you know who I am?" she asked again, her voice low but powerful. The lobby had grown quiet. A few employees stopped in their tracks to listen. Evelyn could feel the weight of their eyes on her. Carter stared at her, his smug smile still in place. "Who are you? Exactly. You're not listed on any board. You're not on any official records. You're just a woman with a sack. What's your game?" Evelyn's lips parted, but before she could respond, the faint sound of a phone vibrating broke the silence. Carter glanced down at his phone, the look on his face changing from amusement to something darker. His eyes narrowed as he read the message. He looked up, a shift in his demeanor. "This isn't a joke, is it?" Evelyn didn't smile, didn't flinch. She only nodded, as the gravity of her words sank in. It was clear something far larger than either of them could grasp was about to unfold. The quiet tension in the lobby of America's Trust Bank hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening every corner of the room. Evelyn stood firm, the weight of the sack in her hand no longer a physical burden, but a symbol of something far more monumental. Carter Spencer, the bank manager, took a step back, his eyes scanning the phone in his hand with growing concern. "Who are you really?" Carter asked, his voice no longer tinged with mockery but with genuine confusion. "This is impossible." Evelyn remained silent for a moment, allowing the growing unease in the room to swirl around them. Then, slowly, she placed the sack on the marble counter with a deliberate thud. The sound echoed, as if the act itself held a deeper significance. She reached into the sack and pulled out an old leather-bound document, its edges frayed with time. Carter's gaze flicked from the document to Evelyn, his skepticism still thick in the air. "What's this supposed to be?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she handed him the document. Her eyes, though aged with time, gleamed with an intensity that seemed out of place in this polished, cold environment. "That," she said, her voice steady, "is the original deed of ownership for America's Trust Bank." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of mockery. It was the kind that suggested something had just shifted, a shift so profound that it left everyone wondering what they had missed. Carter looked at the document, flipping through its pages with a sense of disbelief, as if expecting it to crumble to dust in his hands. But it didn't. He could see the signature, the name he recognized, but also the name he didn't: Evelyn Blake. His face paled. "You're telling me you own the bank?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just me," Evelyn replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "My daughter does too. And her husband, Jasper Blake, is the state minister for economy. He's been complicit in hiding the truth." The name Jasper Blake hit the air like a strike of lightning. It was a name everyone knew, a powerful politician, a man whose hands were firmly grasped around the economic pulse of the state, a man who had always seemed untouchable, unreachable. The thought that he could be involved in anything underhanded made the idea of Evelyn's claim seem even more impossible. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice just enough to make sure Carter heard every word. "You think Jasper's rise to power was just because of his political connections?" Evelyn's voice was thick with both anger and regret. "No, Carter. It's because of the power we've held all these years, hidden, unspoken, but undeniable. This bank was never meant to be in anyone else's hands. It's time for the truth to come out." The sound of clicking heels broke the silence. Sandra Phillips, the bank's head of legal, had entered the scene. She'd overheard the conversation from across the room and had been watching the exchange with growing interest. As a lawyer, Sandra had seen many people come and go, making ridiculous claims, but this felt different. There was something about Evelyn Blake, her presence, her certainty, that suggested she wasn't lying. Sandra, however, wasn't ready to jump to conclusions just yet. "Is everything all right here, Carter?" Sandra asked, her voice laced with professional curiosity. Her eyes shifted to the document Evelyn had presented. "What's this?" Carter glanced at Sandra, then at the document, and back at Evelyn. He still didn't know what to believe. I think we need to get the board involved." Sandra raised an eyebrow, her expression cold and calculating. I don't know what this is all about, Evelyn, but if this is an attempt at a scam, I suggest you leave before things get ugly. Evelyn met Sandra's gaze, unfazed by her threat. I'm not here to scam anyone, Miss Phillips. I'm here to reclaim what is rightfully mine. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something more. Annie Blake, Evelyn's daughter, had always been the public face of the family. A successful businesswoman, respected by those in her circle, and married to the powerful Jasper. But there was a side to Annie that even Evelyn knew was buried deep, hidden under layers of polished perfection, a side that was never meant to see the light of day. Evelyn had seen the hints, the cracks in the facade, and now it was time for the world to know. But it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about taking down the powerful men who had been hiding behind this bank for years. It was about Annie. About showing her that the world wasn't just about the money or the titles, but about something far deeper. Family, heritage, justice. The tension in the room mounted, and just as Carter was about to speak, the lobby doors opened again. This time, it wasn't just anyone walking in. It was Jasper Blake, Annie's husband, the state minister for economy, a man who, until now, had walked through life with the confidence that he could control anything and everything. When he saw his mother-in-law, Evelyn, standing at the counter, a look of recognition flashed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by one of disdain. He took a step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he strode toward Evelyn. Mom, he said coldly, what is this nonsense? Evelyn didn't flinch. It's not nonsense, Jasper. It's the truth. This bank belongs to us. The blood drained from Jasper's face. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to process the implications of what Evelyn was saying. There was a moment, just a moment, where his facade cracked. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He composed himself. You have no right to come here and make these absurd claims, Jasper snapped, his voice rising. Evelyn's eyes softened, but only slightly. She had always known her daughter's husband was ruthless, but she had never seen him this desperate. There was fear behind his anger, and that was something Evelyn wasn't prepared to let slide. Watch your tone, Jasper, Evelyn said, her voice low. This is bigger than both of us. The lobby of America's Trust Bank had become a silent battlefield, the weight of Evelyn's claim hanging heavily in the air. Even as Jasper Blake stood before her, his polished demeanor now faltering, Evelyn could feel the heat of the battle that was about to unfold. She had expected his reaction, but seeing him stand there, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger, it was clear this was not just a fight for ownership of a bank. It was a fight for everything they had worked so hard to bury. Jasper's hand twitched slightly at his side, as if considering reaching for his phone, but then he stopped himself. The room seemed to close in around him, his eyes darting around the silent onlookers. Carter Spencer, the bank manager, had already taken a step back, unsure of how to proceed. Sandra Phillips, the head of legal, stood with arms crossed, her sharp gaze flickering between the two, as if she were waiting for the first sign of weakness. Mom, please, Jasper's voice was low, a forced calm. This isn't the time or place. You're embarrassing yourself. Evelyn felt a pang in her chest, the words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. She had spent years raising Annie to be strong, to stand up for what was right, to never back down. Yet here was her son-in-law, a man she had once welcomed into her family, dismissing her as if she were just another troublemaker. The truth, as it often does, was far more complicated than anyone realized. I didn't come here for your approval, Jasper, Evelyn said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of years spent holding back truths. I didn't come here for your humiliation either. I came here to reclaim what's mine, what's been mine all along. Jasper scoffed, his fingers tightening around the strap of his briefcase. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's ours? Do you have any idea what you're up against? The people behind this bank, the money, the power, it's not something you can just claim by waving around a piece of paper. Evelyn took a deep breath. Her eyes didn't waver from his. though she could feel the stirring of a storm inside her. It wasn't just about the bank. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption that had festered behind the scenes. It was about making sure Annie, her precious daughter, understood that power wasn't something to be traded for a seat at the table. Power was something to be claimed, to be earned, and to be used for something greater than personal gain. "You're right, Jasper," Evelyn said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "This isn't just a bank. This is everything you've built your empire on. This is the thing you've been hiding behind. But you're forgetting one thing." She paused, allowing her words to settle into the tense silence. "You never earned it. I did." Carter Spencer, the manager, finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "But there's no record of you being involved in the ownership of this bank. You're not even on the board, Miss Blake." Evelyn turned her gaze to him, her eyes hardening like steel. "You don't have the full story. None of you do." At that moment, the tension in the room shifted. Evelyn had known it would come to this. She had always known that they would try to silence her, try to paint her as an unworthy claimant. But there was something about the way she stood unbowed, undeterred, that shifted the balance of power. Jasper looked toward Carter, his frustration mounting. "Do you have any idea what she's talking about? Do you realize what kind of trouble this could cause? We've worked too hard for too long to let some old woman with a sack walk in here and tear it all down." Evelyn clenched her fists at her sides, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. She had spent so many years being overlooked, underestimated, even dismissed by people like Jasper. But the truth was far more powerful than their illusions of control. "I may not have the education or the connections you have, Jasper," Evelyn said, her voice growing stronger. "But what I have is something you'll never understand: integrity. And that's why this bank is mine. And you, your husband, your politics, they can't take that away from me." Jasper stepped forward, his voice rising. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything I've built? Everything I've sacrificed for? You think this is about integrity? It's about survival, Evelyn. The game you're playing, the people you're threatening, they don't play by the rules." Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had no illusions about what was at stake. This wasn't just about reclaiming a bank. This was about bringing corruption into the light, about taking down the systems that had enabled men like Jasper to play God while families like hers had suffered. "You're right, Jasper," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is a game, but it's one that's been rigged for far too long. And it's time someone stood up and changed the rules." The room fell into an eerie silence. Even the onlookers in the lobby, who had once been whispering amongst themselves, now stood frozen, unsure of how to react. It was clear that Evelyn Blake wasn't just some bitter mother-in-law making empty threats. She had a deeper knowledge, a knowledge that was slowly beginning to unravel the very foundation of the system Jasper had so carefully constructed. "You don't have the power you think you do," Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. "And I'm not going anywhere until you understand that." Jasper's face reddened with anger, but there was something else in his eyes now, a flicker of fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone who has always been in control realizes they're losing it. The silence in America's trust bank had become unbearable, like a pressure cooker building towards an explosive release. Evelyn Blake stood there unwavering, while Jasper Blake fumed, trying desperately to keep his composure. But his words were growing more frantic, more desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing, Mom," he spat, his voice trembling with frustration. "This isn't just a bank. This isn't just a few rich people's money. It's the system. It's the power that keeps everything running. You're threatening everything I've worked for. Everything I've built, you'll destroy it all." Evelyn's face softened for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never wanted to destroy her daughter's family, never wanted to tear apart the life Annie had built. But what Jasper didn't understand, what he couldn't see, was that this wasn't about destruction. It was about truth. "I didn't come here to destroy anything, Jasper," Evelyn said quietly. "I came here to free it, and to free you from the lies you've been living." Jasper stood there, glaring at her, breathing heavily. But Evelyn noticed something that hadn't been there before: doubt. For the first time, he wasn't so sure of his next move. The foundation of his empire, the very thing he'd taken for granted, was crumbling before his eyes. He wasn't as untouchable as he had always believed. "You still don't get it," Jasper murmured, his voice barely audible. "You're just a mother. You have no place in this world. You think you can change everything with a piece of paper and a couple of words." Evelyn's heart ached. She had seen her daughter, Annie, go through the same struggles, the feeling of being trapped in a world that expected you to play by rules that weren't meant for people like you. But Evelyn had lived her whole life fighting for something bigger than herself, bigger than any system that tried to hold her down. And now it was time for that fight to come full circle. She stepped closer to Jasper, her voice low but clear. "The world might not want people like me to have a seat at the table. But you need to understand, Jasper, power is not about having the most money or the highest title. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's the hardest thing to do. You've been hiding behind this bank, using your power to control everything. But the truth is bigger than your empire, and it's time you realize that." A sudden movement interrupted the conversation. Annie Blake, Evelyn's daughter, stepped into the lobby, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. She looked between her mother and her husband, confusion and concern on her face. Her children, a young boy and girl, were with her, standing in the doorway, uncertain about what was unfolding in front of them. Annie's eyes met Evelyn's, and in that instant, everything seemed to pause. Evelyn had never wanted her daughter to get caught up in this world of power and manipulation. But Annie wasn't the same woman she had been all those years ago. She was stronger now, more aware of the truth. "Mom," Annie said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of emotions, "what is this all about?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving her daughter's. "Annie, this bank, it's not just about money or status. It's about justice. And I'm not going to let your husband or anyone else use it to hide behind their lies anymore." Jasper moved to intercept Annie, but she held up a hand to stop him, her gaze never leaving her mother. She saw the determination in Evelyn's eyes, the strength she hadn't fully appreciated until now. For the first time, Annie realized that her mother had been right all along. "I don't want to live in a world where I have to look the other way, where I have to turn a blind eye to the truth, just because it's convenient," Annie said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to fight for something real, for something that matters." Evelyn smiled, the tears welling up in her eyes. She had always known her daughter was capable of greatness, and now Annie was beginning to see that greatness for herself. In that moment, everything changed. The room seemed to breathe again, as if the walls had been holding their breath, waiting for the truth to be spoken. Jasper, defeated, turned away. There was no way he could spin this, no more lies to hide behind. The truth had been exposed. Evelyn had won, but it wasn't just her victory. It was Annie's victory, too. The family had a choice now to continue down the path of corruption and deceit, or to embrace the truth and rebuild with integrity. The lesson from Evelyn Blake's journey is clear. True power lies in standing up for what's right, even when the world tells you it's not your place. It's about having the courage to fight against systems built on lies and deceit, no matter how strong or intimidating they seem. The real struggle isn't about who holds the money or the power. It's about who holds the truth and is brave enough to speak it. Just like Evelyn, you might face moments where the odds are stacked against you, where it seems easier to accept the world as it is. But remember, the truth is more powerful than any empire built on corruption. And just like Evelyn, you have the ability to change the world around you if you have the courage to speak up. If you found Evelyn's story inspiring, and if you believe that the truth always finds a way to shine, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a powerful story like this.